today, uh, a lot of discussion seems to happen in terms of like short bite-sized sound bites, like memes, for example. You say this meme and it's an emotional or some sort of uh, pathos punch in the face that gets the point across, although intellectually it might be completely devoid of any rational justification. But we're living on memes and emotional appeals and sound bites, whereas in Victorian times, they had discussions, rational discussions, even on a everyday level that I find astounding for our culture today. Like, wow, these people were thinkers. They were articulate. They had back and forth discussions on all sorts of things that we just don't see in our culture today.
So why do you think that is? Is it social media, the way it amplifies the mob, or is it we just don't have the capability to do it? I know you talked a little bit in a previous video of how our brains have degraded over time. Mm-hmm. Like, have we degraded that much that the society in general just can't have a legitimate discussion about idea?
Well, I would think it's a combination of both and other things too, Sheldon. Incidentally, I just watched a TED Talk this morning on Alzheimer's, and he pointed out that our brains have actually shrunk in size over thousands of years. We've lost the equivalent volume of a tennis ball in our brains. And this goes back to some of the genes that seem to code for our brain, but have now become non-functional. So this general idea that we're smarter today than we were in the past, that's simply another misconception our culture has today. But apart from that, we just got to work with what we have. And so given the idea that we're working with brains that would be inferior to those, let's say, 3,000 years ago, given that fact, we still have to function and we still have to do things. So let's look at some of the other factors you mentioned. We have lost, and it's not because of brain size, because actually, it's amazing what you can do with your brains, even for people who have a brain that's substantially smaller in volume than the average person. Some of those people can still be geniuses, literally. So let's not complain too much about our brain size. Rather, back in the early 90s, at the university I happened to be working at the time, it was recognized by the university, we have a serious problem here, that the students coming into university today lack the ability to think critically or rationally. And so one of the things they wanted to institute is a mandatory course for all first-year students on critical thinking. And I happened at the time to be spending a lot of time on universities all across Canada. And this wasn't just a problem on that particular university. It was a Canada-wide problem. And I also spoke in the USA. And it was a problem, and it continues to be a problem there. The loss of critical thinking amongst our students. And why is that? It's got nothing to do with brain size and everything to do with culture. Now, there is another author by the name of Mary Eberstadt who looked at some of the problems that we're facing in today's culture. And one of them, again, Unwin pointed this out, the loss of rational thinking. And he pointed out that that's one of the results of a sexual revolution. But Mary Eberstadt, I think, nailed it as to why it comes about from our sexual revolution. And that is, it decimates the family, reduces the extended family, increases the mental health challenges that people have, and so forth. And one of the things that goes out the window within a generation of a sexual revolution is rational thinking, critical thinking. And it has to do with how we're raised. It has to do with the security and identity that we get from a family, an extended family of cousins and relatives and lots of siblings and so forth. So when that goes, critical thinking goes.
Why is that? Is that you just don't have the conversations that some of us that may have grown up in more of a nuclear type family with mom and dad and some siblings, you have conversations that make you think?
Or is it just... Part of it, I think a big part of it is our own self-identity and mental health. But it also has to do with how many critical conversations you're having as a child as you're growing up. For example, in our family, I have 6 kids. And we didn't say, okay, we didn't micromanage how they get along together every day. If we see a little discussion and a squabble going on between a couple of kids, we didn't immediately step in. Rather, we would watch that from afar and see how they resolve it. And if they resolved it in a good way, which was, having a conversation about it, coming to a mutually acceptable solution to whatever the toy was that was good. And that starts in childhood, these conversations between siblings. And then there's the first cousin meetings, and there's, well, how do we get along with our extended family? And we have to work through that as well. And there's different ways you can work through it. You can just simply not talk about anything, not say anything that's hurtful, but you will have a very shallow relationship that way. And that is one of the earmarks of today's culture, is very shallow relationships. Our relationships, our friends, so to speak, might be followers on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, but the depth of those relationships is minimal. Whereas in Victorian times, you had fewer friends, but they went far, far deeper. And the depth of friendship includes depth of intellectual discussion. That was critical as far as deep friendships go. So with shallow friendships go shallow conversations.